Welcome to Transformative Principle, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principle. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on all the social networks at Jethro Jones. Transformative Principle is a proud member of the B Podcast Network, and it's where you go to get all your great educational podcasts. And if you like education, if you're in education, we've got a show for you. And if you're looking on our shows at bpodcastnetwork.com and you don't see a show, why don't you reach out to me and let's make a show? Because everybody needs a good podcast. And there's so many amazing stories out there that it's just a tragedy if we don't have a show for you. So let me know. That's bpodcastnetwork.com. Today on the show, I'm excited to have Patrick Mongrain. He is a middle school teacher, and he taught history and leadership for 10 years and has been a district level instructional coach and restorative justice specialist. He's currently serving in a TOSA role and is doing some really cool stuff outside of that, which is he's created a coherent instructional framework that applies a Moneyball approach, leveraging data and analytics on key performance indicators. And he's written a book called Theory Can Only Take You So Far, which the title of that just speaks to my heart. And he developed a data collection app called Ed Changer Pro that brings the system to life. So Patrick, welcome to Transformative Principle. Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jethro.
All right, so for those who aren't familiar, tell us about this Moneyball approach and what that means, and then how you apply it in education.
Yeah, thank you. Great start. I'm a baseball fan, and a famous story in the history of baseball is about the Oakland A's franchise and their general manager, Billy Beane. And Billy Beane is famous for managing that franchise, which comes from a smaller market, which means they have, smaller fan base, smaller city, and smaller income. And they're required to compete with all of these higher income teams. And so Billy Beane is tasked with trying to create a competitive roster with less money, which is something I connect with in education. I feel like often we hope to have more resources and more money, and that help is just not coming. And so Billy Beane develops this system of data and analytics in order to create a better, more efficient system within baseball. And so I guess the story is there is a point in the movie where Billy's talking to these traditional minded scouts, and the scouts are judging players on things like the shape of their jaw and how they look and these surface level qualities. In fact, the scene kind of ends when one scout says, "We can't pick up that player because his girlfriend's only a 6. He's got an ugly girlfriend," which to me just like represents so much absurdity because that has nothing to do with how you can play baseball. And so my theory is that we are sometimes applying unintentionally a similar approach to how we judge instruction in teachers. Sometimes it's the teacher with the Pinterest classroom. Sometimes it's the teacher that's popular with the kids. Sometimes it's the teacher that's connected, that has this reputation. And there is great instruction is so critical in schools. And so I've developed this again along with that idea of data and analytics and taking these key performance indicators that Billy Beane used in his analysis of baseball. I've created this system where we do that for the classroom.
Yeah, well, and I love the idea of taking away the things we judge educators on that don't mean anything, because there's a lot out there that we could judge them on, and in a lot of situations, like it just doesn't matter. And so let's get into those key performance indicators that you're talking about, because I have my own perspective on these, but I want to hear yours first, and let's talk about it and maybe see some unique things there.
Yeah, so background, I'll preface my ideas with I'm in a unique position as a professional learning TOSA where I spend like a third of my time in the classroom, often teaching, but sometimes observing teachers, a third of my time working on building systems with principals, and about a third of my time at the district office. And the best part of my job is I get to see all of the amazing things that are happening in all corners of our school district, and that teachers really are incredible. But then the other thing I see everywhere is this feeling of crisis. And I think, and unintentionally, as we've tried to combat that feeling of crisis and find relief, we keep looking at like individual initiatives or quick fixes to try to solve the problem. And my foundational viewpoint is that we have to stop throwing shiny objects and quick fixes at the problem and start building and maintaining systems. And so again, I've done that from an instructional practice perspective and created a classroom system and just analyzed a ton of research and evidence and my own experience as a teacher, and then also used AI a little bit. And I found consistent that the practices of building community and relationships, intentionally planning routines, teaching expectations, informed supervision, I call it, positive feedback, corrective feedback, and opportunities to respond or rigorous questioning are the most critical indicators of great instruction. And then I add the eighth practice of what would be considered like that first wave of tier two in the classroom, teaching moves for targeted support. Those practices make a classroom system. And the way that I phrase that is I use the quote, systems equals hope. And what that quote means to me is that as a teacher, I'm going to have hope when there's a logical next step in my work. And so when you have that system implemented, say your class feels contentious, it's a really clear logical next step to build community and relationships. If your class feels chaotic, install routines. If your class feels cold, then you want to increase positive reinforcement. So that system creates that logical next step, and that's something that's going to give teachers hope.
I like that. All right, so I was taking notes while you were talking. Building community, classroom routines, informed supervision, feedback, opportunities to respond, rigorous questioning, teaching moves for targeted support. Did I miss one?
Teaching expectations,
Teaching expectations. Okay,
which kind of
thank you.
falls in line with routines, right? But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's good. What I really like about what you said is that these systems create hope. And so when you're struggling with something, then you can figure out what the next thing is to do. And you gave some good examples there. So I want you to go into that a little bit more. How do you know that these are the next right things, or do you have to learn that? Do you have to be taught that? What's the process for making sure that you know what the next right thing is? Because it's not really going to give you hope if you are like, well, if if it feels cold in here, then I'm just going to work on giving more opportunities to respond, or I'm going to have more rigorous questions. Those are not necessarily going to fix that cold atmosphere in the classroom. So, how do you know what the right thing to do is?
Yeah, and that's a really, I mean, part of it is, I think, building capacity in this system over time, and you start to recognize those things. And so I could answer that question in two ways, I think. I would say that it starts with some people are really intuitive at making those decisions and seeing those human elements in a classroom. And honestly, generally, I was in a conversation with this, state high level MTSS person recently, and he said something that kind of floored me. He said, I love your app because, what I've learned is only 2% of teachers really need to be evaluated, 98% of teachers need to be coached. Um, and so a lot of people are really intuitive in making those decisions. But I would first answer that question is what we need to do is level set and build capacity in instruction. And I think the only way that we do that is starting to collect data on instruction. So I'll use the simplest possible example. Uh, a lot of people are familiar with the idea that there's approximately 4-to-1 positive to negative interaction ratio that's thought of as optimal in a classroom. And you hear between 3 and 5-to-1 for that number, but that's something people are familiar with. And I can, as a observer, just sit in the classroom and tally PPN, and tell you as a teacher exactly what your ratio is. And so by having that data collection, you start to see what optimal feels like, right? If I collect data on you 3 times and once you're 1-to-1 and once you're 2-to-1 and once you're 4-to-1, then you can feel what 4-to-1 feels like, but you also get to see how that impacts your students. And so that kind of profound learning and growth that happens based on that data collection is, I think, that's how we build capacity and maybe people who can't so intuitively make those decisions.
I really appreciate that. And some people are intuitive response because some people get it, and some people can walk into a classroom and set all those things up in virtually no time at all because they are just so good at it, either through practice or naturally. And so, like, for me, my first year teaching, there were a lot of things I needed to learn how to do, but there were a lot of things that I just knew intuitively needed to happen, and nobody told me. In fact, I was in alternative routes to licensure teacher, so I didn't take any education classes before I got my first teaching job. Not a single one. However, I've been teaching, my whole entire life since I was 12 years old in different ways. So I was there were a lot of things that I already knew, and so stepping in, I had, probably 75% of the way there of being a great teacher on day one, and then I needed to learn some strategies beyond that. But at this point, it's now my 20th year in education. I can go into any classroom with any group of adults or children and be able to command the space and set up expectations and establish routines very quickly because I've just learned how to do those things. And that's not the case for everybody. And that idea of I need to talk to that person who said the 2% of teachers need to be evaluated, 98% need to be coached. I think that's absolutely right because we also know that like 98% of teachers pass their evaluations and it's just a hoop to jump through and it's a waste of everybody's time, and yet we keep doing it because it's not really necessary. What's going on with that?
Yeah, I love that point. You probably saw on my face point about
Yeah.
the our evaluation being a hoop to jump through. In our evaluation system, it's 30 indicators with a rubric with 4 different descriptors that it's so complicated and teachers are so busy. Most teachers, I don't even think, know what they say. And I think, again, this system, so I'll dive into what I really want to say is that, you know, I just think teachers are so incredible. There are so many amazing teachers doing so amazing things. And um, having that evaluation system that's so complex versus this simple system of 8 objective, like observable data points is something that's going to bring teachers efficacy. And the way I want to say it is I use the quote often, repeating is not the same as creating in my work. And I think teachers are just so incredible. And there's almost 2 injustices here. One, I don't think teachers have been presented that simple of a coherent system of here's the 8 practices that you need to do. It's these 30 indicators that seem so much, and then they get overwhelmed. But the other injustice is I don't think they've ever often aren't coached in this way that really acknowledges how incredible they are and that they are the experts of the students. And so this process of data collection, if I sit in the classroom and I tally students EEED for engaged, disengaged, and then I calculate after about 3 rounds of going through the class that 70% of students are engaged. I can sit down next to that teacher and say, you have 70% of students engaged. 80 to 90 is the optimal ratio. The RTI triangle shows us that, right? What are we going to do about it? Here's some new activities. Maybe it's as simple as choosing some new activities, or maybe we need to install a new routine. Maybe there needs to be some increase in positive feedback, but I can have that coaching conversation where it's not me just stripping away all of their creativity and personality and telling them what to do. It's us sitting side by side and them making the decisions for their classroom because they're the experts, because they are. Teachers are incredible and they deserve to be acknowledged as such, I think.
Yeah, and they're professionals. And it's crazy that we have this complex, convoluted, impossible to manage expectation about their, evaluations. When the first district I was a principal in, we had 54 indicators, and like they would say there's no way for you to do all 54 of these in a single observation, but that doesn't make anybody feel like that matters. And the other part of it is that there's so much there that it seems like it's intentionally designed to make it difficult for them to notice and pay attention. We, as the principals, when we do these evaluations, we're doing them on multiple teachers multiple times. So we are familiar with the tool. And what I like about your and other simple approaches, like Craig Randall, do you know his trust-based observations?
No, I've never heard of Craig Randall.
Okay, he's over in Tacoma, so he's a Washingtonian also, and his trust-based observations is fantastic because it's all about building trust through that process, and what we need more of is respect for teachers as professionals and an opportunity for them to know exactly what good teaching looks like and how they can be great teachers and not have it be so complex that it's like it some proprietary formula that determines what your scored number is based on all these observations and data points that is so opaque you don't know really what's going on. But what you're saying is, here's engagement, and my word for that is enrollment. Kids can be engaged, but that doesn't mean that they're enrolled. Like, you can be engaged in an activity but not be paying attention to it or not care about the end result. Enrolled means you are choosing to be part of that activity, and you're choosing to fully engage in it yourself, rather than, kids can be engaged in coolmathgames.com, but that doesn't mean that they're learning anything. And so that type of approach of, here's what it looks like to be a good teacher, here's some clear data points that say that, those are important because that also gives clarity. The systems give hope, but those systems and expectations also give clarity about what good looks like. But if it's 30 things, it's too much. If it's 8 things, I think that's a little bit more manageable. And I would even argue that you could probably get it down to maybe even 5, and that would be much more manageable. But that's work that I'll leave you to do, Patrick.
Yeah, no, thank you. I agree. And I mean, the two response I would say is I love that point that you made as far as just the overwhelm nature of those evaluation systems from 54, 30 indicators. Either one is a lot. And it kind of brings me back to that original point where that idea of like quick fixes and shiny objects that are going to solve the problem. Like, what ends up happening in education generally, from what I see, is that, and again, I think generally with the best intentions, everybody's trying to make things better for kids, but when everybody's got a different initiative, and so there's 8 initiatives coming at teachers, and then there's, we try them for 6 months and they work or don't, and something comes down the pipe that's next, it creates that constant feeling of initiative fatigue. And so that's kind of the premise, again, of my work is like, we can't continue to try to solve all of our problems in education with initiatives. We have to start building and maintaining systems. Mm-hmm. And you're right. I could probably combine intentional routines and teaching expectations and corrective and positive interactions to just feedback and make it more like 5. But either way, like, that's a system. And it's there, whether it's 5 or 8, and we have to really at some point start building and maintaining systems. Education has changed a lot in the last 10 years, and it's going to continue to change faster, and we're not going to be, in fact, I'd say we're already behind on the inclusionary practices and AI changes that are coming.
Yeah.
If we don't start building and maintaining systems now, things are going to continue to get harder.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on the initiative thing, I have a podcast episode that I'm going to put in the show notes where we did 34 initiatives in 3 years at my middle school, and there was no initiative fatigue. And here's how we dealt with that. We said, here's our goal, and here's where we're going. This is our vision. And if you as a teacher think you can do something to help us move toward that vision, we will adopt that as an initiative. But we're only going to adopt initiatives once I, the principal, have set the vision, we're only going to adopt initiatives that teachers bring forward. So the district's not going to have a mandate that they're going to add in later and say, this is what we're all going to do now. We have a vision, and we're going to put into place those things that you teachers are coming up with that we need to implement to do the vision for our school. And we had happy teachers, we had effective teachers, we had students who were growing 2 to 5 grade levels in our remediation classes in math and language arts. And these were all because of the efforts that the teachers were saying, this is what we need to do our work. And whenever somebody brings up initiative fatigue, I have to tell that story because it doesn't have to be that way, you know? And that's the key. You can make changes within your schools.
Yeah. Well, what I hear you saying there is, to be honest, and using that word initiative, but I hear you actually saying you built a system and you
That is
installed all
right.
of these components, right? That's what I hear you saying. And
Yep.
maybe because initiatives are required, you have to install new ideas into schools to keep up, but doing it in a way that's sustainable and it fits coherently within a system um, is the mindset shift I think that needs to happen. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that point?
No, totally. I mean, that's the whole thing is we set up systems where if you felt like something needed to be done, you could bring that forward and we could make a school-wide change. But it had to come from the teachers, or there were systemic things that needed to happen that I had to initiate. For example, one of those things was we need we have too many kids who are below grade level, and so we need to adjust how we do language arts. So for example, we had 90-minute blocks of language arts. I'm a language arts teacher. I love it. I could like sit around and talk about books and reading and writing all day long. However, we had a lot of kids who were struggling even in that system with all that extra time. So we said we're going to reduce the required time for ELA to 45 minute period for everybody. And then anybody who needs extra help is going to get targeted additional support in an additional period. And so because we had it set up, we had the teachers, we had the things in place, we needed to make a system-wide change, but we could do that within our arena of influence and make it work for our students, which was very beneficial for them. And that's where we saw huge gains because taking away that 90-minute block of language arts also gave students who needed math support additional help. And that's where we saw kids go from a second grade math proficiency level to grade level math proficiency in a semester, which was incredible. I almost didn't even believe it when I saw it. And I was like, there's no way that these kids could grow this much. And yet they did because they got very targeted, specific support in the areas that they needed. And a huge part of that had nothing to do with teaching, and it was a ton of mindset work for those students. They had been told they were dumb in math their whole lives, and this teacher spent a lot of time telling them that they could learn how to do math, that it wasn't impossible. Whereas all their previous teachers have been saying, you're just an idiot, you can't do this. Not by using those words, but by the actions they took. So anyway, that time at that school was really amazing and incredible. We did a lot of cool things. So check out that link, people who are listening. Initiative fatigue is what the link is. And then I want to talk a little bit about your app before we close, because it's one thing to say, here's all this good, great stuff that we can talk about, but you actually made an app to make it easier to keep track of all this stuff. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so how the app works specifically is, again, I have found and created data points based on a ton of research and evidence, like I said, a little bit of help from AI for all of those 8 practices. And so each one has what I call like games. You open the app and you can click on each practice and it brings you into a game, because they're kind of like little games. When you're sitting in a classroom and you're tapping P or N, it kind of feels like you're playing a game. Or one of them is like student to teacher talk time. The data point is that um, 70% of class should be student talk, 30% of class should be teacher talk. So you're sitting and toggling back and forth between student talk and teacher talk. They're kind of little games and they're kind of fun to play, but then again, really they're data monitoring tools. And so you go into a classroom, you open the app, you pick a practice. These make great 10-minute observations. Again, positive, negative interactions, students being engaged for one routine, whatever that is. And you collect the data as an observer, or teachers can do this on their own, right? Like a teacher could sit there and track their interactions or if students are engaged. And after the observation, it brings you to a screen that gives you your data. And then when you hit OK, it pops up your email and it sends the teacher an email with their data. And would I have like 3 high quality resources for each practice? So the teacher then can do some learning. So if I'm monitoring your, I'll do my favorite one for you, Jethro. I'm monitoring your informed supervision. And so how that's set up is I come in the app and I tap on a grid to create a map of your classroom. And then when I hit OK, the map pops up, but now it's touchable and I can drag my finger around your supervision patterns. And anytime you stop and interact with a student, I can tap positive, negative, or PN or O for opportunity to respond. Did you positively reinforce, correct, or ask them a question? And I do that for 10 minutes. And then it sends you the map. It sends you the interactions you had with your students. And then it also sends you a 10-minute webinar of me talking about informed supervision. Like the first resource, which is like how to strategically make those interactions. When I approach a student, do I positively reinforce, correct, or ask them a question? And then the third resource is this tiered framework. So that's like if you're a refined teacher and you kind of know how to make those decisions, but the tiered framework provides like 6 or 7 deeper resources. And then it also provides these 3 resources that I've created, like a one pager that explains a project, a tier 1 like teaching moves, and then a tier 2 like teaching moves for targeted support. Um, so those are the 3 resources: the webinar, like a first steps for refinement, and then a framework that has tiered resources that anyone can find something to support their practice. So each of the practices have those games that you can play, send the data to the teacher with resources. So again, that acknowledges them as experts. They can go through the resources and decide how they want to adjust based on the data that they got.
That's great. So now, when the principal's sitting in the back of the room, is just playing games on his iPad.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
No, I actually really like that because I personally I used observations as a game when I was doing it, and it was how many things on this 54-point checklist can I mark off, and can I get them all, and I would make it a game because for me that was the only way to survive doing it. But I like this intentionality in making it more like a game so that it's actually a fun thing to do and it's not tedious and not boring for the teacher or the principal who's in there observing.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's
Yeah.
good. So I got to introduce you to Ben at Classroom Mosaic, who does a lot of stuff with principal and teacher observations. Because I think you two would you'd probably hit it off pretty well. So I'll make that connection after we're done here.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So my last question is, I ask this at the end of every interview. What is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative leader like you, Patrick?
Man, that's a tough. I think, you know, there's so many things. And it does really, I think it all comes back down to relationships. I have kind of 2 things I want to say, but it all comes down to relationships. Taking the time to connect with your teachers, be there to support them. That's such a big thing to say, right? Because how do you do that? But finding a way to stop by and connect with the teacher every day, or making sure when there's student behavior issues that the teacher doesn't feel alone, or finding ways, to build teacher practice so they have increased efficacy. Um, and I guess I'll say to that is that a quote I use a lot is self-care is working in a system that you feel confident in, right? The story I tell is like during COVID, our systems were a mess, and you want like how I responded was I bought a pool table, and me and my buddies played pool till 3 in the morning often, and that was our self-care. But guess what? We woke up the next day tired and struggling, and we still had all of our work to do, right? But um, when you feel confident in the system, so as a teacher, when I feel confident that I can instruct my classroom, um, that's what teachers really want. That's real self-care for teachers. It's not going to get a massage after school. Teachers care so much about they care desperately about their kids. They just want to be better teachers. So supporting them in that too.
Very good. Well, this was awesome. You can connect with Patrick in the show notes. I have a link to his LinkedIn, a link to his book, Theory Can Only Take You So Far, and a link to the app EdChanger Pro, which you can get yourself and try it out and see how it goes. Patrick, thanks so much for being part of Transformative Principal today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jethro. I appreciate you.